Hi everyone. I have read your discussion board posts and your written assignments and posted feedback in the rubrics in the Blackboard for you. I was really interested in your concepts and thoughts about the use of providing students a test blueprint for their tests. This is a very heated topic in many colleges and universities. There are some colleges that have gone to the point of actually writing policies about whether you can and cannot provide students a test blueprint or a study guide, and if you can, to what detail it can be in. So it's always interesting to see different people's ideas. The other thing that was interesting was how many of you talked about your prior experience in your undergraduate program of how tedious the studying was for material that never showed up on a test, and how frustrated you were that you were tested on material that didn't appear to have been covered in class or even very well covered in your textbook or your other resources. And I would say that those experiences really reflect a failed execution of a good teaching plan. One of the things that I have learned in my time in teaching is that failure to plan means you're going to fail to execute. I personally do not provide a test blueprint to my students in a formal manner. But what I do is I blueprint my test very clearly to the content that I've covered. I make every effort to test students on concepts that I felt were important enough to cover in lecture. I provide them a topical outline for each unit that we cover, and I lecture to that topical outline. So when they open up their notes, their topical outline follows the book very closely, and then their topical outline will have notes from our lecture. And then the test comes from that topical outline and the lecture. So that is one of the ways that I try to prevent the students from having extraneous information. I tell them, if you've read your textbook once, you've come to class, you've taken good notes, you are prepared from a content standpoint to have been exposed to all the important concepts. And the topical outline really does hone in on key concepts that I find are important. The other thing that I intentionally do is I write all of my tests before I teach the content. So I know when I'm talking in class about a topic, I know how I've covered it on the test. So there's some congruence in what information I share that's important. Now, I do not tell students, you need to write this down because you're going to see it on a test. I also don't cue them to say, hey, this is really important, hint, hint. I expect them to pay attention and be dialed in class. And it's been my experience that students are able to walk away from their testing experience with me being able to say, well, we covered that in class. It was on the outline. I knew that it was important. So there's lots of different approaches to covering testing content and giving the students a fair shake at reasonable content and levels of information. The only time I do give a test blueprint, and this is my own practice, is for final exams. I feel like if you've covered 25 units of content and you're going to do a cumulative exam, you really are setting your students up to be overwhelmed by not paring down key concepts and helping prompt their memory on things that were important prior to their testing. So that is one time that I do intentionally give them a test blueprint so that they have some guide to understanding what to expect on a very large final. But again, I want to remind you that there's not a right or a wrong. There's lots of a mix of these practices. You've got to decide using our evidence base, our current practice recommendations, and your own comfort level with your lecture and your course content to be able to make a decision that you can live with and be able to stand in front of your students and be able to properly defend and explain in a cogent manner that doesn't further frustrate them or cause more confusion. So it was great to see those ideas. One of your classmates, I think, did a fantastic job of really encapsulating the ideas behind a fair testing approach. Your classmate, Pamela, wrote, taking an examination is just the worst. As a student of many years, there have been numerous unaccountable hours spent studying for a test that did not seem to have a clear purpose. I was remembering my fellow nursing students' discussion as they were exiting the doors of an exam room, with their faces appearing distraught and feelings of unpreparedness being expressed to one another. These students would begin criticizing the test with the statement that they never covered that. Where did they get that question? Or there were only a few questions about that topic. It always seemed that going into and coming out of these tests, that there was not a well-developed foundation for the test questions. At least, that's what the students thought. I think Pamela does a great job of really kind of honing in on a student's experience of a failed execution of content being exposed and then evaluated. That is a real valid concern for students. And we all have to do what Pamela did, which is walk in their footsteps. Everyone in this program can say, I've been there before. We're nurses teaching nurses in a variety of settings, whether it's in the community setting or the clinical setting or whether it's in an academic setting. We've all been there. So we can certainly be empathetic and sympathetic to their experiences of frustrations from a learner perspective. So I think Pamela did a great job with that. The only comment I have from an APA standpoint is to remind you that these writing exercises, while they're only 3 to 4 pages, they still need to have level headings to divide up your content. I'm going to encourage you to get your APA book out and read the difference between a level 1, 2, and 3 heading. In these types of short papers, you really should be using level 1 and level 2. In your paper that's due in, it's due soon. It's in week 6. So your philosophy of clinical evaluation, that's a longer paper. You should be using level 1, 2, and 3 in that paper because of the length and the complexity of those topics that you're going to be covering. So I want you to practice it and get into the habit of using level headings appropriately. It's not enough to title your paper with the page, with the paper heading, and then move on. And the next week, you've got your writing assignment is on test items. I'm going to remind you now that you may or may not choose to write your own test items. By writing your own test items, you won't need to cite sources. But if you are citing sources, if you're taking out med-surg textbooks or you're using websites, I think that's okay. But you need to properly cite your sources. One of your alternative test formats is a hotspot. You're going to have to find an image. Cite where you got the image. It's just as easy to plagiarize in these irregular types of papers as it is a formal paper. So don't get tangled up in using resources that don't actually belong to you without properly citing it. So feel duly warned. I want you to know that if you can use whatever approach you want to this paper, but I do want to remind you that it should be in a paper structure. There should at least be an introductory paragraph that introduces the alternative test items, and that you should follow a cogent flow or a reasonable flow so that it does follow a paper, and references are expected. Make sure you're following your rubric. Touch base if you have questions. I know you're out there and feel like it's in the Ethernet somewhere that you're all by yourself, but you are not. I'm here. Let me know if you have questions or concerns. If you've gone through my feedback and you're not sure what is meant or you have some concerns about it, touch base and let's discuss it so you move forward with clarity. We're just over the halfway point, so you're almost done you're closer to being done than starting, and you guys are doing a great job. So well done. Know that, again, I'm here. I hope you guys are having a great week. I hope wherever you are that you are staying cool. It is hopefully going to be a little bit cooler here in Roanoke. It's been in the upper 90s, and that has been very miserable walking puppies outside. You guys touch base if there's anything I can do. Take care and have a great week.